So I get the response that you had a lot with the idea that Christianity and dance, I didn't know these two things go together. I kind of assumed that Christianity is very anti-dance. And I would say first that you are correct. Like there is certainly a strain of anti-dance, anti-body, anti-moving body, and anti-women's bodies that is present throughout Christianity, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think for me, as a scholar, as an adult, it was really fascinating to go back and reflect on my personal experiences as a child, now with the lens of these different theoretical practices from religious studies and from dance studies, to look at like, okay, what's really happening here? And one of the things that was really interesting is that in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, in particular, when I was a child, there was kind of like a rebirth of particular forms of dance within conservative Christianity. And it kind of followed the trajectory that contemporary Christian music did. So it was very much a way of like, let's take something that is, you know, pop culture and of the world, and let's kind of reformulate it for our own community in a more kind of controlled form. So depending on the different denominational influences, and I also had a lot of Southern Baptist influence, and Southern Baptist traditionally tends to be very anti-dance. And I actually taught at a summer camp where I taught dance classes, but I wasn't allowed to call it dance. I had to call it interpretive movement or creative movement, and which was a very semantic, you know, I don't really know what the logic was around that, except just avoiding using the word dance. But I also was a part of congregations that were more charismatic. And the charismatic Christian tradition has always had a strain of the ecstatic in it, and kind of dance forms that were more kind of spontaneous. And so I was kind of like right in the intersection of that. So it was pre-choreographed dances that fit into a particular area. So it's like, okay, we're going to bring dance in, but ecstatic dance is maybe a little bit too out there for us. Let's do something that's a little bit more controlled. So there were definitely messages that I got about the body in general and dance in particular that had to do with control, and a sense of, you know, okay, we're going to let this in, but we're going to really tighten the parameters around what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to wear. So there was a sense of like, I think at the time I probably interpreted it as discipline, but now I see it much more in terms of suppression and oppression. But at the same time, one of the things that I try to do in the book is show that there was still something quite radical about what these groups were doing, because they were predominantly women, and they were often a part of the formal service, which is traditionally designed and run by men, with men's voices being the main interpreter of, you know, sacred texts and religious experience and communication about what God is and what God's truth is. And so there was an element of it that was very radical and avant-garde, to have women, not only women, but women's bodies being something that was also participating in leading a congregation, and in, you know, being some kind of a vehicle for truth, and kind of, you know, saying something about what God is in the world.